Quick test. If I gave you 1 year, full salary, zero obligations, what would you do with it? If your answer took longer than 5 seconds, your brain is running a glitch that psychologists have been studying since 1966. The good news? It's fixable. The bad news? The longer you ignore it, the more it decides your life for you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people walking around today, smiling, posting, living their best life, have no idea what they actually want. They just got good at pretending. And if that's you, I need you to hear this in the first 30 seconds. It is not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's a specific, well-documented psychological state. And once you understand the machinery behind it, you can actually start to fix it. Hey, I'm Core. Let's get into it. So let's start with a question that sounds simple, but isn't. Who are you? Not your name, not your job. Who are you? What do you value? What do you want your life to look like in 10 years? If your brain just went quiet, you're in good company. Because the man who basically invented the modern idea of an identity crisis, a psychologist named Erikson, argued that building an identity is one of the central tasks of being human. Erikson mapped out stages of psychosocial development, and the big one, the one that hits like a truck in your teens, and honestly, keeps hitting for years after, he called identity versus role confusion. His idea was that we're all trying to answer that question, who am I? And if we don't get a clear answer, we're left in a fog of confusion about our own direction. But here's where it gets really useful. A researcher named James Marcia took Erikson's big, foggy idea and, in 1966, turned it into something you can actually use. Marcia said your identity status comes down to 2 things, exploration and commitment. Have you actually explored different paths? And have you committed to any of them? Cross those 2 things and you get 4 states. And I promise you're living in one of them right now. The first is foreclosure. That's when you've committed hard to a path, but you never actually explored. Think of the kid who becomes a doctor because mom and dad were doctors, and grandpa was a doctor, and the question was never really open. Full commitment, zero exploration. The second is diffusion. No exploration, no commitment. You're not searching and you're not settled. You're just drifting, scrolling, avoiding the question entirely because it's too heavy. The third is moratorium, and this is the big one for anyone who feels lost. Moratorium is active exploration without commitment yet. You're trying things. You're questioning. You're in the messy middle. It feels awful, but hold that thought because this one matters. And the fourth is achievement. You explored, you wrestled with it, and then you committed to something that's genuinely yours. Now here's the pattern interrupt. Most people assume not knowing what you want is the worst possible state. It isn't. The genuinely stuck state is diffusion, the drifting, the not even looking. Moratorium, the exploring but not decided phase, that's the engine room of actually figuring yourself out. It's uncomfortable on purpose. But let me steel man why it feels so bad. Because there's a real psychological cost to not having a clear sense of self. And it was measured by a psychologist named Jennifer Campbell. In 1996, Campbell and her colleagues published research on something called self-concept clarity. They defined it precisely, the extent to which the contents of your self-concept are, in their words, clearly and confidently defined, internally consistent, and temporally stable. In plain English, high clarity means you know who you are. Low clarity means your sense of self is blurry, contradictory, changing from one day to the next. And here's what Campbell found, in her own words. Low self-concept clarity was independently associated with high neuroticism, low self-esteem, chronic self-analysis, and a ruminative form of self-focused attention. Read that again. Low clarity didn't just come with more anxiety and lower self-esteem. It came with rumination, that loop of chewing over yourself without ever getting anywhere. It's a kind of self-focus that just spins. Think about what that means. When you don't have a clear internal map of who you are, every decision becomes harder because you have no reference point. Someone asks, "What do you want?" and you have nothing solid to check the answer against. So you freeze, you second guess, you outsource the decision to whatever's loudest around you. And that brings us to a problem that would have baffled our ancestors. You have too much choice. Let me tell you about jam. In the year 2000, 2 researchers, Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper, set up a tasting booth at Draeger's Market, an upscale grocery store in Menlo Park, California. Sometimes they displayed 6 flavors of jam. Sometimes they displayed 24. The big display of 24 attracted more people. 60% of passing shoppers stopped, versus 40% at the small one. More crowded, more exciting. But here's the twist. Of the people who saw 6 jams, 30% bought a jar. Of the people who saw 24 jams, only 3% did. That's 10 times more purchases from the smaller display. Sit with that. More options made people less able to choose. The abundance didn't free them, it froze them. This is what psychologist Barry Schwartz called the paradox of choice in his 2004 book. Schwartz built on an idea from an economist named Herbert Simon, who decades earlier split the world into 2 kinds of decision makers. There are maximizers, people who need to find the absolute best option, so they examine everything. And there are satisficers, people who have standards, find something good enough, and move on. Simon called that satisficing, a word he built by fusing satisfy and suffice. And here's the finding that should change how you live. The maximizers, the ones chasing the perfect choice, tend to end up less happy, more regret, more second-guessing, more paralysis. The satisficers, who just pick something good enough, are more satisfied with what they get. Now scale that up from jam to your entire life. Career, relationships, cities, identities. Social media has handed you a display of 10,000 jams. Every possible life is on the shelf. And so, like the shoppers, you stall. Not because something's wrong with you, because that's what human brains do in front of infinite options.
Which raises the question, okay, Core, so how do I know what I actually want?
Let me complicate that even more, because your own brain is playing a trick on you. There's a neuroscientist named Kent Berridge who spent decades studying reward, and he discovered something that quietly explains a huge amount of modern misery. In the brain, wanting and liking are 2 different systems. As Berridge and his colleague Terry Robinson put it, the circuitry that makes you want something is dissociable from the circuitry that decides how much you like it. Wanting is driven heavily by dopamine. It's the pull, the craving, the I need this feeling. Berridge calls it incentive salience, and he says it's generated by large and robust neural systems that include mesolimbic dopamine. Liking, the actual pleasure you feel when you get the thing, runs on much smaller and fragile systems. And here's the shocker. It is not dependent on dopamine at all. Which means these 2 can come apart. You can intensely want something you don't even end up liking. Ever chased a goal for years, finally got it, and felt nothing? That's the gap. The wanting system dragged you across the finish line, and the liking system never showed up. So when you ask, what do I want? Be careful, because raw wanting is not a reliable guide to what will actually make you happy. Dopamine will scream for a lot of things that leave you empty. And then there's the comparison problem. Time for another pattern interrupt. A lot of what you think you want, you don't actually want. You just watch someone else have it. Back in 1954, a psychologist named Leon Festinger proposed social comparison theory. His core insight was that when we're uncertain about ourselves, our abilities, our opinions, our worth, we don't evaluate ourselves in a vacuum. We measure against other people. It's an automatic human drive. Now, that was already true in a small village in 1954. But you don't live in a village. You live inside a feed engineered to show you the top 1% of everyone's life, all day, forever. So your comparison-based self-evaluation system is being flooded with impossible reference points. You look successful people up, feel like you're behind, and then adopt their goals as your own. Not because those goals are yours, but because comparison told you they should be. This is how you end up wanting a life you never actually chose. So let's talk about what a wanted life actually looks like, according to the research. Because 2 psychologists, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, spent their careers on this, in what's called self-determination theory. And they found that not all motivation is equal. There's extrinsic motivation, doing something for a reward, for status, for approval, to avoid punishment. And there's intrinsic and autonomous motivation, Doing something because it genuinely aligns with your values and interests, because you'd choose it even if no one was watching. And the research is remarkably consistent. Autonomous motivation is linked to greater well-being, more persistence, and better psychological health. Chasing external rewards at the cost of what you actually care about quietly corrodes you. So what do you want is really the wrong question. The better question is, what would I choose if status, money, and other people's opinions weren't part of the equation? That's the question that finds intrinsic desire.
Now, I want to be fair to your brain here, because there's a reason this is genuinely hard. Not just emotionally, but mechanically. Your working memory, the mental workspace where you hold and juggle information, is tiny. For decades, people quoted George Miller's magical number 7, but more careful work by the cognitive psychologist Nelson Callan pinned the real limit even lower. On average, about 4 chunks of information at a time. 4. And figuring out my entire future is not 4 pieces of information. It's thousands, all at once, all interacting. When you sit down and try to think through your whole life in one anxious sitting, you are overloading a system with a hard capacity limit. Of course it crashes. That's not weakness. That's like being mad your phone can't render a video the size of the ocean. And there's one more layer most people never hear about. To know what you want, you have to be able to read your own internal signals, the quiet yes or no your body gives you. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio described this with his somatic marker hypothesis, the idea that emotions produce physical signals, a tightening, a lift, a gut feeling, that guide our decisions, especially the hard ones. Trust your gut turns out to have real machinery behind it, but not everyone hears those signals clearly. There's a trait called alexithymia, literally no words for feelings, where people genuinely struggle to identify and describe their own emotions, and to tell them apart from plain bodily sensations. In one large Finnish study of over 1,200 people, researchers found about 13% qualified as alexithymic, and it was nearly twice as common in men, at 17%, as in women, at 10%. And even below that clinical threshold, plenty of us have just spent years ignoring our internal signals so thoroughly that the volume got turned way down. If you can't feel the yes, you can't follow it. So let's pull this together, because I don't want to just diagnose you and walk away. Here's what's actually going on when you don't know what you want. You may be in a healthy exploration phase that just feels bad. Your sense of self might be genuinely blurry, which makes every choice harder. You're drowning in options that freeze you. Your dopamine is lying to you about what will satisfy you. Comparison is feeding you goals that were never yours, and you're trying to solve all of it at once with a working memory the size of a sticky note, while possibly being disconnected from your own gut signals. No wonder, right? This was never a personal failing. It's a genuinely hard problem, running on hardware that wasn't built for it. So here's how you actually start to fix it. Practical, psychology-backed, doable this week. First, stop trying to find your one true passion in a single sitting. That's the working memory trap. Instead, run small experiments. This is moratorium done on purpose. Take a class, try the hobby, shadow someone in that job. You don't discover what you want by thinking harder. You discover it by doing things and watching how you feel afterward. Second, become a satisficer on the small stuff. Not every decision deserves maximizing. Where to eat, what to watch, which brand to buy. Pick good enough and move on. You are protecting your limited mental fuel for the decisions that actually matter. Maximizing everything is how you end up exhausted and still unhappy. Third, build self-concept clarity deliberately. Journaling works here, and there's real reason it does. Writing forces the blurry, contradictory self into concrete words. Ask yourself what you believed a year ago that you don't now. When did you last feel most like yourself? You're drawing the internal map that makes every future decision easier. Fourth, separate wanting from liking. When you're chasing a goal, ask, am I chasing this because I'll love having it, or because the pull feels intense right now? Look at the people who already have the thing you want. Do they look like liking, or just more wanting? Fifth, audit your comparisons. When you notice envy, get curious instead of ashamed. Envy is data. It sometimes points at a real desire. But ask honestly, do I want the thing, or do I just want to not feel behind? Curate the feed that's flooding your comparison system. You wouldn't let a stranger reprogram your goals, so don't let an algorithm do it. And sixth, turn the volume back up on your gut. Before a decision, get quiet and notice what your body's actually doing. Does the yes option make your chest open up or close down? You're rebuilding the connection to the internal signals that were there all along. And here's the last thing I need you to hear, and I mean this. Not knowing what you want is not the end of the story. In the research on emerging adulthood, a life stage identified by the psychologist Jeffrey Arnett for roughly ages 18 to 25, the years of exploration, instability, and feeling in between aren't a detour from the path. For a huge number of people, they are the path. The exploration is the point. The people who scare me aren't the ones asking, "What do I want?" They're the ones who never asked, who foreclosed, who took the default, who woke up at 50 living a life they never chose. If you're confused right now, it might mean you're one of the few people brave enough to actually keep the question open until you find a real answer. So be patient with yourself. Run the experiments. Protect your energy. Draw the map. And trust that the fog is not a sign you're lost. Sometimes it's a sign you're finally exploring. If this helped even a little, do me a favor and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow and helps me keep making these. Drop a comment and tell me which of the 4 identity statuses you're in right now: foreclosure, diffusion, moratorium, or achievement. I read them all. And if this video hit home, the one popping up on screen right now is going to hit even harder. I'll see you there. I'm Core. Thanks for watching.